It's funny how life works. One minute, you're the guy everyone envies for having the perfect marriage, and the next, you're wondering if the irony gods are personally targeting you. Let me tell you, when your wife comes home from a girls' weekend with more than just Instagram stories, you start reevaluating everything you thought you knew about loyalty. My name's James, and for most of the last 8 years, I was that guy, the one with the enviable life. My wife, Olivia, and I had the kind of marriage that made people groan and mock jealousy. She's gorgeous, smart, and had this magnetic personality that could light up a room. I, on the other hand, am your run-of-the-mill solid guy. Decent job in finance, predictable hobbies, and about as exciting as lukewarm oatmeal. But hey, I liked being the oatmeal till Olivia's star power. Together, we worked, or so I thought. Our life was built on all the usual cliches of suburban bliss. A tidy house in a quiet neighborhood, vacations that looked great on Facebook, and evenings spent binge-watching the latest streaming sensation with takeout on the coffee table. I thought we were happy, or at least as happy as two people juggling jobs, family obligations, and a mortgage could be. Sure, Olivia had a busy social life that sometimes left me wondering how she still had the energy to laugh so brightly at book club wine nights, but I never doubted her commitment to us. Things began to shift subtly about 3 months ago. Olivia started talking about an old college friend's wedding, an event in Charleston she was clearly excited about. She described it as a girls' weekend, just her and a tight-knit group of old friends getting together to celebrate. I didn't think much of it at the time. Why would I? She'd gone on plenty of trips before, and I always encouraged her to keep those connections alive. But now, looking back, I can see the signs I missed. First, there were the extra shopping bags. Olivia had always loved fashion, but in the weeks leading up to the wedding, she seemed to be stocking up on a whole new wardrobe. Dresses, heels, even lingerie, which she coyly dismissed as a treat for herself. Again, I didn't think much of it. Every now and then, she'd go through these phases where she wanted to freshen up her look. Who was I to judge? Then, there were the workouts. Olivia was already in great shape, but suddenly she was hitting the gym 5 times a week like it was a personal vendetta. She'd come home glowing, talking about how she wanted to look her best for the photos. It made sense. Weddings are basically Instagram Olympics these days. But there was something else, a flicker of something I couldn't quite put my finger on, like she was living in a world I wasn't invited to. The weekend of the wedding arrived, and Olivia left in high spirits. I helped her pack the car, kissed her goodbye, and told her to have fun. She looked back at me, her smile warm but almost distracted. "Don't worry," she said, her voice breezy. "I'll miss you." At the time, I believed her. Now, those words feel like the prelude to a cruel punchline. The weekend passed uneventfully, at least for me. I did the typical things a husband does when left to his own devices. Ordered pizza, binged old action movies, and tried not to destroy the kitchen while making coffee. Olivia sent me a few photos of the wedding. The bride looking radiant, the group laughing over drinks, Olivia in a green dress that made her look like something out of a magazine. I felt a pang of longing for her, that little ache you get when you realize just how much you love someone. When she came home Sunday evening, she seemed different. Not wildly so, just enough to make me notice. She was quiet, claiming she was exhausted from the trip. Her suitcase sat untouched by the door for 2 days, which wasn't like her. Olivia was usually the kind of person who couldn't stand leaving things undone. I chalked it up to post-wedding fatigue and didn't press her. But then came the sickness. It started with a fever, then a strange rash. Olivia brushed it off as something she might have picked up from traveling. "Probably just a bug," she said, lying on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her. But when the symptoms didn't go away after a week, I insisted she see a doctor. She hesitated, almost as if she didn't want to go. That hesitation gnawed at me, but I couldn't explain why. The day she came home from the doctor, her face was pale, her eyes wide and unfocused. She mumbled something about needing antibiotics and went straight to bed. I tried to ask what was wrong, but she snapped at me to stop hovering. That wasn't like her. Olivia never snapped, at least not at me. That night, as I lay in bed listening to her breathing, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. A seed of doubt planted itself in my mind, and for the first time in our marriage, I wondered if Olivia was hiding something from me. At the time, I couldn't have guessed the scale of the betrayal I was about to uncover. But the pieces were already falling into place, even if I couldn't see the picture yet. It's funny, people always say hindsight is 20/20ths. What they don't tell you is how much it sucks to look back and realize you were the fool all along. Looking back, it's easy to see the signs were there all along. But in the moment, you tell yourself all sorts of stories to avoid confronting the truth. You convince yourself that you're overthinking, that you're being unfair, that your marriage is built on trust, and you're not the kind of person who snoops. But sometimes, the universe decides you need a wake-up call, and boy, did I get one. It started small. Olivia's behavior after the wedding weekend wasn't glaringly suspicious, just off. She was quieter than usual, distant in a way that didn't feel like exhaustion. She'd always been the type to share everything, from work drama to what she had for lunch, but now she seemed to be holding back. Her phone, which she used to leave lying around, was suddenly glued to her hand, and when she wasn't using it, it was face down on the counter. At first, I didn't let myself dwell on it. It's easy to make excuses when you love someone. She's just tired. She's stressed from work. She's recovering from the trip. I wanted so badly to believe those things that I ignored the gnawing feeling in my gut. But that feeling didn't go away. In fact, it got worse. Then came the incident with her phone. One evening, Olivia left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went to shower. Normally, I wouldn't have even noticed, but this time it buzzed. Once, twice, 3 times in quick succession. I glanced at it, and for a moment I froze. The messages weren't from a work group chat or a friend. They were from an unknown number. Had an amazing time this weekend. Can't stop thinking about you. My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. Surely, there was an explanation. Maybe it was one of her friends joking around, or a message meant for someone else. But even as I told myself those things, I knew they weren't true. The messages were personal, intimate in a way that made my skin crawl. When Olivia came back downstairs, I acted like nothing was wrong. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the doubt was there now, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention. I noticed how often she smiled at her phone, how quickly she locked the screen when I walked into the room. I noticed how vague she was when I asked about her day, and how her answers felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced them. The unease I'd been trying to ignore was growing into something impossible to dismiss. The turning point came when Olivia finally confessed the real reason for her doctor's visit. I came home one evening to find her sitting on the couch, pale and visibly shaken. When I asked what was wrong, she hesitated before muttering something about a minor infection and a prescription. She handed me a bag from the pharmacy, her hands trembling. I glanced at the label, and my heart sank. It wasn't antibiotics or cold medicine. It was an antiviral medication used to treat STDs. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stared at the label, then at her, waiting for an explanation. But Olivia avoided my gaze, mumbling something about how these things can be dormant for years, how it wasn't a big deal. The excuses were weak, and we both knew it. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past few weeks. The shopping sprees, the wedding weekend, the guarded phone, the texts, the medication. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they painted was one of betrayal. But I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof. The next day, while Olivia was at work, I started digging. I pulled up our shared phone account and scrolled through the call and text logs. Sure enough, there was a number that kept popping up, calls and texts at all hours, many of them from the weekend of the wedding. I copied the number and ran it through a reverse phone lookup. The name that came up was unfamiliar. Jeff Harper. I didn't recognize the name, but I remembered Olivia mentioning a Jeff in passing, a friend of the bride, someone she claimed to have danced with during the reception. At the time, it hadn't seemed significant. Now it felt like a lead. My next step was her social media. Olivia was careful about what she posted, but her friends weren't always as discreet. I scrolled through the tagged photos from the wedding weekend, and there was a picture of Olivia standing next to a tall, well-dressed man. The caption read, "Such a fun weekend with old friends and new ones." My chest tightened. This was Jeff. Over the next few days, I kept digging, recovering deleted messages from her phone and piecing together a timeline of events. The texts were flirty, suggestive, and filled with references to the wedding weekend. One message stood out. That night in Charleston was unforgettable. Unforgettable. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Olivia hadn't just betrayed me. She'd done it so casually, so easily, as if our marriage didn't mean anything. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but something held me back. If I was going to do this, I needed to be strategic. So I decided to wait, to watch, to gather everything I needed before I made my move. I wasn't just dealing with a betrayal. I was dealing with a person who thought she could get away with it. And if she thought that, she didn't know me at all. There's a strange clarity that comes with betrayal. It's the kind of sharp awareness that cuts through the haze of love, loyalty, and trust, leaving you with the cold, hard reality of what's left. After uncovering Olivia's messages with Jeff, I realized I couldn't confront her without more. She'd deny it, twist it, or worse, make me question my own sanity. So I went deeper, determined to uncover everything. It began with her phone. Olivia's habit of leaving it unlocked while she showered was the only vulnerability she had overlooked. I accessed her messages again, combing through the thread with Jeff. This time I didn't just skim. I dissected every line, every timestamp. Their exchanges painted a vivid picture of a romance that had been simmering for months. The texts revealed their plans to meet at the wedding. Jeff had messaged her days before, confirming their secret rendezvous at the hotel bar after the reception. She responded with excitement, eagerly detailing what she would wear and how she'd slip away unnoticed. My chest tightened as I read their conversations about the night they spent together, the intimacy, the stolen moments they shared. The betrayal wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate. After saving screenshots of everything, I turned to our financial records. I accessed our shared credit card account and began scrutinizing the transactions from that weekend. It didn't take long to find discrepancies. Charges for drinks at a luxury hotel bar, a spa visit she hadn't mentioned, and a rideshare service at an hour far too late to be innocent. Each charge was a nail in the coffin of my trust. I wasn't done. My mind buzzed with the need to confirm what I already knew. I tracked down Jeff's name using a reverse phone lookup on the number from her texts. It wasn't difficult to find him. His social media profiles were public and filled with posts from the wedding weekend. There he was, smiling in photos alongside Olivia, their body language far too comfortable for strangers. One image showed her laughing at something he said, her hand lightly brushing his arm. That gesture, so small yet so telling, burned itself into my mind. The worst part was realizing how brazen they had been. Olivia hadn't bothered to hide her tracks. The texts, the transactions, the photos, it was all out in the open, as if she believed I'd never think to look. But I needed more. Speculation wasn't enough. I wanted irrefutable proof. I hired a private investigator to dig deeper, someone who could confirm what I had suspected and uncover anything I might have missed. I gave him everything I had: Jeff's name, the wedding details, and the timeline of Olivia's behavior. While waiting for his findings, I found myself replaying every interaction with Olivia since her return from the wedding. The subtle shifts in her behavior now screamed for attention. The way she avoided eye contact, the guarded tone when I asked about her trip, the sudden bursts of affection that felt forced. It was as though she knew she'd done something unforgivable and was trying to overcompensate without admitting it. A few days later, the investigator contacted me with his report. He confirmed what I already knew, but added layers I hadn't anticipated. He'd uncovered security footage from the hotel that showed Olivia meeting Jeff at the bar and, later, walking hand in hand with him to a room upstairs. The timestamps aligned perfectly with the messages I'd found. Worse, he discovered this wasn't the first time they'd been in contact. According to phone records and surveillance, Jeff had visited Olivia on at least 2 occasions after the wedding, both times while I was at work. It wasn't just a one-night mistake. It was an ongoing affair. That revelation hit me harder than anything else. She hadn't just lied to me once. She'd built an entire web of deceit and carried it into our home. The evidence was overwhelming. Texts, photos, financial records, and now a detailed report from a professional. It was all there, laid out like a grotesque mosaic of betrayal. I sat in the living room that night, surrounded by the pieces of my broken marriage, feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and a strange sense of relief. At least now I knew the truth. But knowing wasn't enough. Olivia had thought she could get away with this, that I would remain oblivious while she lived a double life. She needed to face the consequences of her choices, and I wasn't going to let her twist the narrative or walk away unscathed. As I organized the evidence into a single folder, a plan began to form in my mind. Confronting her wasn't just about closure. It was about reclaiming my dignity. I didn't just want an apology. I wanted her to see every piece of her betrayal laid bare, to know that she hadn't just fooled me, but had destroyed the trust and life we'd built together. That night, as Olivia slept upstairs, I stared at the folder on the coffee table. It was heavy with proof, but it also felt like it carried the weight of our marriage. The person I'd loved, the life I'd cherished. It was all gone now, replaced by something hollow and broken. I didn't feel the need to rush the confrontation. Timing was everything. I would wait for the perfect moment to unravel her lies, to show her the reality of what she had done. When that moment came, she wouldn't just face my anger. She would face the truth, undeniable and inescapable. Patience is a strange thing. It feels like a punishment when you're waiting for something you don't want to face, but when you know you're preparing for a reckoning, it feels like power. After I gathered all the evidence of Olivia's betrayal, I let it sit for a few days, quietly building my resolve. Confronting her was inevitable, but I wanted to ensure that when the moment came, there would be no escape for her. The days leading up to the confrontation were almost surreal. Olivia went about her routines as though nothing was wrong, smiling at me over breakfast, asking about my day, occasionally kissing me on the cheek. But I could see it now, the cracks in the facade. She wasn't fooling me anymore, and every time she looked at me with those bright, fake eyes, my anger simmered just a little hotter. I spent my evenings organizing everything into a neat package. The texts, the financial records, the private investigator's report, and even the hotel surveillance footage were all compiled into a single folder. I printed out screenshots, annotated timelines, and cross-referenced every piece of evidence. By the time I finished, it felt less like a dossier on her infidelity and more like an autopsy report for our marriage. I didn't stop at the evidence. I began taking steps to protect myself. I opened a new bank account and moved half of our savings into it. Legally, it was within my rights, but I knew it would catch her off guard. I consulted a divorce lawyer, someone sharp and relentless, and shared the evidence with them. They assured me I had a solid case, especially with the financial misconduct and proof of an ongoing affair. But the part that stuck with me the most was what my lawyer said near the end of our meeting. Be prepared for her to play the victim. When people get caught, they rarely admit they were wrong. They double down. Stay calm and stick to the facts. I kept that advice in mind as I planned the confrontation. I knew Olivia. She wasn't just going to fall to her knees and beg for forgiveness. She would try to manipulate the narrative, turn the blame back on me, or make excuses for her actions. But I wasn't going to let her. The night I chose to confront her started like any other. Olivia came home from work a little later than usual, claiming she'd stayed behind to catch up on emails. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral, and offered to make dinner. She smiled, clearly relieved that I wasn't suspicious, or so she thought. We ate in relative silence, her scrolling through her phone while I sipped my wine and mentally rehearsed what I was about to do. When the plates were cleared, I told her I had something to show her. She raised an eyebrow, curious but unsuspecting, and followed me to the living room. The folder was sitting on the coffee table, thick and ominous. I gestured for her to sit, then took a seat across from her. Her smile faltered as she noticed my expression, calm, cold, and entirely devoid of the warmth she was used to. I slid the folder across the table. For a moment, she hesitated, her fingers hovering over it as though she already knew what it contained. Finally, she opened it. The first page was a screenshot of the text messages with Jeff. She stared at it, her face draining of color, and quickly flipped to the next page. There were more messages, each one more damning than the last. Her breathing quickened as she turned the pages, her eyes scanning the financial records, the hotel receipts, and the private investigator's report. By the time she reached the photos, Her hands were trembling. The image of her and Jeff at the hotel bar was grainy, but clear enough to be incriminating. The final nail in the coffin was a still from the hotel security footage. The two of them entering a room together, her hand on his arm, her face lit with a smile I hadn't seen in years. For a long moment, Olivia didn't speak. She simply sat there, staring at the evidence of her betrayal laid out before her. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes were filled with tears, not of guilt, but of panic. She opened her mouth, but I raised a hand to stop her. I didn't want to hear excuses or denials. There was no room for ambiguity anymore. She'd been caught, and we both knew it. I let her sit there in silence for a while, letting the weight of what she'd done settle over her. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, trying to figure out how to salvage the situation, how to twist the narrative in her favor. Eventually, she broke the silence, her voice trembling as she tried to explain herself. She talked about feeling lonely, about how our marriage had grown stale, about how she never meant for things to go this far. But her words rang hollow. They weren't apologies. They were justifications. I didn't argue with her. I didn't yell or throw things. I simply listened, my face unreadable, as she dug herself deeper into a pit of self-pity. When she was finished, I stood up, picked up the folder, and told her it was over. I didn't wait for her reaction. I walked upstairs, packed a bag, and left the house. She called after me, her voice desperate and pleading, but I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I'd seen enough. That night, as I sat in a small hotel room with nothing but my overnight bag and a folder full of heartbreak, I felt an odd sense of relief. The worst was over. The truth was out. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could finally breathe. Revenge isn't about impulsive rage. It's about precision. In the days following the confrontation, I wasn't just grieving my marriage. I was preparing for its burial. Olivia thought I'd leave quietly, that I'd lick my wounds and let her walk away unscathed. She was wrong. I didn't just want a divorce. I wanted her to feel the weight of her choices, the kind of pain that lingers, that doesn't fade with time. Olivia had turned our life into a lie, so I made it my mission to unravel hers. First, I finalized my financial protections. The day after leaving, I froze our joint accounts. She wouldn't be able to access a dime beyond her personal savings. The lawyer I'd hired ensured that the financial records we uncovered, showing her using our shared money for her escapades, would work in my favor during the settlement. Then, I made sure to notify the people closest to her. Her parents, who had always admired me, received a copy of the evidence. I wasn't vindictive in my delivery, just factual. I wrote them an email explaining why I had left, attaching the folder as proof. The silence that followed said it all. Within a week, Olivia had confided in me that they'd cut off contact, too ashamed to be associated with her. Her work life wasn't spared either. Olivia worked for a company with a strict ethics policy, especially regarding conduct that could damage the company's reputation. A well-timed anonymous email sent to HR included the same evidence I'd shared with her parents. I didn't embellish, just let the truth speak for itself. 2 weeks later, she was called into a meeting and promptly let go. I knew Olivia would try to salvage her image socially, so I got ahead of her there too. I confided in a mutual friend, someone who couldn't resist sharing gossip but was sympathetic to me. The story spread like wildfire. Within days, everyone in our social circle knew what she'd done. The judgment wasn't mine to enforce, it was theirs. But the final blow came during the divorce proceedings. Olivia expected a fight, but my lawyer made sure there wasn't much of one. The financial misconduct sealed her fate. She lost any claim to the house, and her share of our assets was reduced significantly. The judge awarded me a favorable settlement, citing her actions as the cause of the breakdown of our marriage. When it was over, Olivia was left with nothing but her own mistakes. No job, no social standing, no financial cushion, just the hollow life she'd created by choosing lies over loyalty. It's been 6 months since the divorce was finalized. People always say revenge doesn't bring peace, and they're partly right. It didn't erase the betrayal, didn't undo the years I spent loving someone who didn't deserve it. But it did give me closure, a way to reclaim my life from the wreckage Olivia left behind. After everything settled, I sold the house. It wasn't a place of memories anymore. It was a graveyard of broken trust. I moved to a smaller, quieter town, started fresh in a place where no one knew my story. I found a job that was fulfilling, not just financially, but personally. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living for myself, not for someone else's expectations. Olivia reached out once, months after the dust had settled. Her tone was different, less defensive, more resigned. She didn't ask for reconciliation. She knew that ship had sailed. She just wanted to apologize. It wasn't the apology I dreamed of. It felt hollow, forced, like she was trying to absolve herself of guilt rather than make amends. I listened, but I didn't respond. Some doors are better left closed. As for Jeff, last I heard, he disappeared from Olivia's life shortly after the divorce. Typical, really. He wasn't interested in her as a person, just as a thrill. Once her life started crumbling, so did his interest. I'd like to say I felt bad for her, but that would be a lie. She chose her path. Looking back, I don't recognize the man I was during those weeks of discovery and revenge. I was angry, hurt, and desperate for justice. But that version of me is gone now. In his place is someone stronger, someone who understands the value of trust and the cost of losing it. I've started dating again, cautiously, slowly. I've learned to be honest about what I want, to set boundaries, and to trust my instincts. Betrayal changes you, but it doesn't have to define you. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Love is only as strong as the trust it's built on. And when that trust is broken, you don't have to stay and let it destroy you. Sometimes, walking away isn't just the right choice. It's the only one.